I learned that if it didn't die on its own, Jodi Hildebrandt would kill the relationship so that it could be reborn.
Meaning your marriage.
She would destroy it in any sociopathic way alive. And if you look in these records that I've got written documents of her in action doing this to be scrutinized by professionals.
Now, this is Adam Steed, and we have spoken about him before. He was one of the few who courageously came out and spoke out against Jodi Hildebrandt's just god-awful tactics in her counselling sessions. He said many things, one of which was particularly important to note. Jodi tried to basically rip apart and successfully ripped apart his marriage towards his wife to the point where Jodi actually had his wife believe that, Adam was some form of a predator. And it has gone as far as, he's actually had his kids taken away from him. I'm not sure on the situation on that now, but we're just going to go into a little bit of what I found in the sense that he's now being silenced once again in court. He has appeared on Mormon Stories podcast, and Mormon Stories podcast actually came out and said that during their interview, the interview went up, it did extremely well. It was really quite sad, and you can't find it online anymore, but it really goes into detail about what he went through with Jodi Hildebrandt. What ended up happening was that the Mormon Stories podcast, they were contacted by a court which supposedly might actually be Adam's ex-wife, telling them to take the video down, and they were issued a restraining order.
Mormon Stories podcast has just received today a temporary restraining order requiring us to take down our interview with Adam Paul Steed, the courageous whistleblower to Mormon Church Boy Scout sexual abuse in Idaho.
Now, Adam has pointed it out a couple of times now. I've heard him say this on, I think, 2 different interviews, that he massively suspects the church appointed Jodi Hildebrandt to him because as a way of spite, because him and his father were actually the whistleblowers to the Boy Scouts in Idaho. Extremely sadly, Adam was actually a victim of sexual abuse. So they sought to, have rules, have laws put in place, and I think they actually succeeded through the court system. Now, I've said all of this because this means that he's had quite close links with Jodi Hildebrandt. Now, what I can gather from what he's been saying and his socials, etc., he has been battling it out in the family court, trying to come to some sort of an arrangement for him and his children. Now, he has very, very young children. I believe one is quite literally under the age of 1. They're very small children, and he has been trying to gain access after in his own words, it was like they were kidnapped. They were literally just 1 minute they were there, 1 minute they were gone, which is eerily similar to what other people account from Jodi Hildebrandt, separating the wife and the kids. Now, I say all of this because Adam has actually been posting on his Facebook page. I got this off of the Reddit, but on his Facebook page, it is public in the sense that, you can follow, you can go have a look. But he is saying that he is being silenced. He's being silenced across all platforms. And he's been posting to try and get people's attention. And I feel like by me posting this, it's going to push the word out a little bit more, because he's basically being silenced no matter where he goes. And he's being silenced by the family court. He's being told that he can't be saying any of this and that they don't really care about the truth. Basically told him that he's not allowed to talk about any of this to the media. He also details that there has been some fraudulent paperwork going on and that the court records are not accurate. And this is really quite scary. I think it's incredibly important to be able to, include these stories. And even if, they're not being included within his own family court hearings, I'm not even sure if they're still going on right now, but even if they're not, they still need to be heard for the general media. And it is actually become quite difficult to even find any of his interviews. His interviews used to be recommended, and I feel like they're dropping like flies. I also feel like his story really needs to get pushed out more as well, because he details how Jodi basically made up this whole thing, told it to his wife about him being a predator. And that, it sounds like exactly what has happened when Ruby Frankie came out in court and said that one of her children was doing things of a similar nature. Was absolutely horrific, and I'm not going to be repeating it. the ties are similar in the fact that they're making up these stories of just obscene predatory behavior.
I read it and I thought I thought this man would be a terrible person, and then I realized it was me, and my kids were taken away from my baby and my sorry, my the most important thing in my life was taken away because of that.
Several weeks ago, I spoke up and shared the damning information about my story where the Mormon Church, Jodi Hildebrandt, and others suppressed sexual abuse in the Mormon institution that happened to me. It was the highest live watched Mormon stories of all time. It was an intricate plot where church leaders sent me to Jodi Hildebrandt, then they destroyed my life. Brigham Young University Honor Code Office was an accomplice to this destruction. I have 500 pages of Honor Code Office records that I subpoenaed. I shared them for the first time on Mormon Stories podcast. I told my story on that podcast. Several people involved in corruption were exposed with their own documentation. Now, I'm sure you guys have already caught on, but he is referring to the podcast that he did with Mormon Stories, which was a really, really, really good watch. But in it, he basically came out with this great big binder, this big kind of black binder, just full of documents in it, just detailing all of the problems, all the individual sessions. He goes into detail. He basically kept a lot of things and he documented a lot of things quite cleverly, really, because this was the end result of it.
Document. There's emails between Jodi Hildebrandt and my ex-wife as her patient, as she takes this girl that struggled with control issues and was 3 weeks after a baby was born, trying to figure out logic at that point in your life. And from earlier on, she takes her from someone that talks about her life and her problems with me as being little things in normal people's marriages, and Jodi teaching her how to confront all that stuff, and then Jodi weaving into her that she has to be scared of all this stuff with all this addiction talk, and then Jodi talking, like in the Honor Code office, to Ed Morin. She says she has to help Morwenna because Morwenna is in denial and confusion.
Since then, I was court ordered to ask media not to tell my story. The grounds for this court order was a family judge interpreting my comments as negative about other party. I'm not saying they are not true, said the judge. However, she also ordered that we couldn't talk about the actual context. I strongly disagree with her logic and think that it is a cover-up by the Mormon Church using a family court involved in racketeering. I just looked on my Facebook post about my Mormon Stories podcast, and there is a note that says independent fact checkers have rated the disappeared post as partially false information. I tried to fact check these fact checkers, but they were all in different languages from different parts of the world. I don't know what is going on. My freedom of speech has been removed by a 4th District family court. I can't defend myself. I can't share documents that fact check prove the truth. They say I signed away my freedom of speech. I can't even share what they say that I signed, but this interpretation is not what the agreement says. The same Mormon church that is involved in the corruption of my case is the same one that ordered the gag order and who is complicit. Not only did the gag order judge reinterpret what was signed outside of its meaning in English, they also pulled the original agreement from documents that were fraudulently turned into their court or possibly fraudulently changed by the court itself instead of the ones from our settlement. Okay, so by the sounds of it, they have gone through the court system, and now the same court system are basically turning around and saying that he can't be saying any of this to social media because of a court document that apparently isn't even a court document that he signed, or it isn't the case. I'm telling you, this just sounds so incredibly fishy. I find it so bizarre that this kind of stuff actually happens, that the church or religion in general will make this kind of a stance on things. Bear in mind, I'm not a religious person. I just think it is absolutely insane how they are trying to cover this up. Also, on the record, in that last hearing, the judge stated, I care way more about you not being contempt in court than I care about the truth. The same judge who then said they were doing this to protect parties involved. But an eerie feeling filled the courtroom as we know who they were really protecting. But judge, what about when the courts are contempt to the truth? What about false settlement documents being put in the courthouse instead of the ones that we signed? and me being held to the radical interpretations of these documents being used, limiting my freedom of speech. I could maybe understand it to a certain degree if they were talking about his wife, but even so, I still feel like she needs to be held to the flame for doing that to him in the very first place. And if the judge is literally turning around and saying, like, we don't care about the truth, I'm saying it all bloody, everyone's knowing where it's pointing. I'm not anti-religion or anything, so don't get this one twisted. This guy is ex-Mormon. This would be a crime, no? Like, you can't just, like, falsify documents. Like, this should be reported, no? Like, this is a crime. Can you imagine having your freedom of speech taken away by someone who cares about 100% obedience, but who doesn't care about truth, and is pulling her claim from documents that were not the ones that were signed in the settlement conference? But now, somewhere, someone on the in can go on Facebook and argue falsely that there is inaccurate information, but we aren't allowed to defend and share documented evidence because of the Utah 4th District Court. I strongly believe the Utah 4th District Court is involved in the cover-ups of the sexual abuse cases in the Mormon Church, through racketeering with top church leaders to punish whistleblowers who expose child abuse cover-ups in the Mormon Church. I was there. I know the truth. In this short matter of time, you have only convinced me that rather than take responsibility for your crimes, you will bury the truth. You will cheat democracy by blocking the public from hearing the facts. You act like you don't, but you kind of do. Claim you are from God. It's the Mormonism in you. Claiming absolute obedience is more important than truth, as you did in that last hearing. I think you believe if God told you to sacrifice your firstborn son like he did Abraham, it will be a great of your obedience. I am that child of truth being sacrificed here, and I can tell you it always was murder. Only a cult would inoculate its people into absolute obedience over manifest truth of innocent life. There were 10,000s of comments of people on that post and others I did, which said things positive about the content of the post you deemed negative. There was hardly a negative comment to be found. You in court removed it on the grounds that it was negative. You used an overly broad protective order that said I was not allowed to say negative things in front of said party, and then implied that this meant I couldn't say anything to the press or online either. And you deemed it negative when really it exposed the corruption and power of the Mormon Church, which had negative implications for the 4th District Court. You can really tell that what he's saying is genuine and comes from a place of absolute hurt. Even the Mormon Stories podcast was reached out to and told that they're basically going to get a restraining order and they can't share the interview, so he's being silenced on that end. But he has been silenced before, especially, you know, when he was the whistleblower for the Idaho Boy Scouts. So it feels like no matter at what angle he tries to come at, the church, the court, whoever, whatever, is making it nigh on impossible for him to be able to get his story out. You also said that the only document the public can see is one that I never signed. Someone in your court process originally fraudulently put that document there as if it came from both parties, but you were totally okay with that being the only document the public can see. I can't believe the corruption and power coming from the Utah 4th District Court. Let me tell you something about your future, since you always prophesied about ours. You know who you are. There are too many good people in this world to let this corruption continue as part of government and or religion. You may have learned how to manipulate us out of our own voices, but that won't last long. I believe it will only hasten your downfall. You had a chance to lead us with truth, but you chose this. I will find my voice, and with it I will expose and condemn you publicly until you have no place to hide. My generation of people will find our voices, and with them we will speak our truth, and your money, which actually was the people's money, won't be able to silence us. Which is another big reason why I really wanted to cover this post, because I feel like no matter what angle he tries to go at, he is being silenced. So I'd like to think of this as, you know, being able to get this post out there. Papers are being put forward, orders are being put forward that he didn't sign, and I just think it is an ultra sad situation, and I really do wish him nothing but the best, because all the clips that I've seen of him are so incredibly sad, and I think he needs a lot of support. I mean, he's one of the people that people don't really talk about as much, but he was a victim of Jodi Hildebrandt. Jodi Hildebrandt did ruin his life, and Jodi Hildebrandt has also ruined the lives of the 8 passenger children alongside Ruby Frankie. So I do think it's incredibly important to pass this message on. That is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are in this world. Take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and I will catch up with you guys in the next video.
The woman doesn't seem too alarmed about her physiological issues. So when you say, how do I live in truth? I've just given you numerous examples of what you can do. Are you willing? Or are you going to tell me that that's not realistic? So I don't know what else to tell you, because anything shy of you not kicking her out of the house is not going to help this young woman.